Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to the Politics and Media Show. Now, second half, we're discussing the events in Luton. You must be aware, a few months ago, there was a demonstration organized by supporters of Al-Muhajirun during a homecoming parade of the Anglian regiment from Iraq. And there's some placards were held up, butchers of Basra and what have you, and of course it made all the newspapers describe it as a very provocative, very incendiary protest, and it led to, we saw in the end, we saw the far right organising marches in Luton. They went on the riot, they went on the rampage, they beat, they smashed up Muslim businesses, they beat up Muslims, and also a mosque, Islamic centre in Luton, Masjid al-Ghuraba, was firebombed also just a few weeks ago. Now, Asghar, you're from MPACUK, the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, a very popular website as well, MPACUK.org. You, for a long time, have been a staunch critic of the likes of Al-Muhajirun, but at the same time, you've also been a staunch critic of many mosque management committees, saying you believe they're not sufficiently training the younger generation in terms of politics. Well, you said, how do you see
not doing enough, are they? And I think this Luton protest, which is the first of many, believe me, you're going to see the BNP rising in Britain, and you're going to see a lot more attacks against Muslims, is due to the fact that mosques in this country have failed to use their institutions and their millions of pounds and their big halls to outreach to the wider non-Muslim community, to thousands of them, in any sustained way, and at the same time fail to teach young Muslims how they can actually behave in a practical, politically mature way, and actually make a difference in Britain. You heard just before how if we got involved in the system we could actually make a change. They haven't done either of those two things, so we end up demonised, and we end up with our young people joining groups like Al-Muhajirun. Now it's a chickens coming home to roost. Now they get firebombed, now all of a sudden they want to get active. What about when we're getting attacked on the streets? Where are they then?
And you saw what Muhajirun did. It's a stunt they've done many times before, which is to hold a provocative stunt, invite a cameraman there, and then the next day it's plastered all over the newspapers, and it generates acres of coverage. And it seems they both need each other. Muhajirun need the media need a bogey person.
You've got to ask yourself this. Obviously there's no way of knowing, but you've got to ask yourself this. How comes every time the government want to push a certain type of opinion, that Muslims should be backing the troops, that we need to extend the detention, etc., we need to go to war, why is it always this particular group that's used as the whipping boy, that they come onto television, do some crazy stunt, and it's kind of like the proof in the pudding? Look, the Muslims are evil and we should have a backlash against them. And all of a sudden you've got these, on the other side you've got young Muslims who do not have any leadership in this country, having no direction as to how they should respond, falling exactly into the psychological warfare trap that simply says we must distance ourselves from extremists, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, which is a stupid kind of childlike way of reacting. Muslims have got to be proactive. They can't allow themselves to be used as kind of propaganda tools. This group is, in my opinion, heavily infiltrated. It's there to do a job for whoever's paying it. The Muslims have got to start to understand. You can blame Al-Muhajirun until the cows come home. They're going to do what they're going to do. For whatever reason, they're going to do it. Why are we sleeping until we get firebombed, until we get attacked in the streets? When will our leadership start to say, let's do some practical things? Let's have telephone hotlines where millions of non-Muslims can call every time they read an article in the Daily Express attacking the Muslims. Let's have question times in all of those areas. Let's have open days where thousands of non-Muslims every month can come into the mosque. Let's have all the practical things. I'm not asking for rocket science. It doesn't even cost a lot, and yet we can't do these simple things because the old leaders in the mosque are simply saying the same old thing: no politics in the mosque.
Asghar, you've been involved heavily with MPACUK since its foundation. You're one of the founders of MPACUK, and it's been several years now. It must be 7-8 years.
That's right.
Have you not seen in those 7-8 years any positive change amongst British Muslims? Are you saying there's been no progress made? How would you assess those years?
I would say, saying to Abdul Rahman earlier on, that the young Muslims are becoming far more political, and they're becoming far more mature about how they actually care about Palestine, actually thinking about these issues rather than constantly talking about minor theological debates that they used to do. It's changing, but without organised structure, that energy is just wasted. And then you have other groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir or whatever who will go into these young people and say things like, don't get involved in politics, it's kuffar, blah blah blah. And because they don't have any direction from the mosques, that's exactly what they're going to do. So we've got an untapped pool of young Muslims who actually care about the ummah, and yet all we're doing is wasting them, because every time they go to a talk in the mosque, it's about the perfect length of the trousers, or some arcane matter, and you go to Islamic Society, student Muslim Islamic Society, even during the Gaza event, some ISOCs in this country, student Islamic Societies, were running talks on the belief in the jinn, and where you can find information on the jinn. I mean, when our leadership going to actually address the issues that are confronting the Muslims in this country, in this world today?
So basically, you think that wait for the older generation to pass off?
No, we can't wait, because as you can see right now, Abdurrahman, Luton, when they burned the mosque out, they didn't wait for us to change. They'll burn it down when they're good and ready. The media is not waiting for us to wake up. They're priming the public to create this hatred in society against us. So we can't wait. We have to start to become active. We have to become politically conscious Muslims. And when we start to instead of see Islam as a politically conscious faith that drives us to organise the affairs of the ummah and mankind, then we will step into a different realm of Muslim.
Last week we saw the election of two BNP members as members of the European Parliament, Nick Griffin and Andrew Bronze. And in his speech that evening, Nick Griffin said openly that he believes Islam and democracy do not mix. Islam is not welcome in Britain. These are, he's openly saying this on television. Now, if he'd made those remarks about another faith, I mean, he would have been in big trouble. But the fact is, this public has been primed over a number of years. How do you go about challenging that kind of very, very poisonous rhetoric, Asghar?
There's two things that the Muslims can do, and they're so powerful, and it's such a crime that they are not being educated and led towards that. Yeah, one is we need to reach the non-Muslim masses ourselves directly. We can't go necessarily always through the media; they don't give us that avenue. But what we can do is we've got 2,000 centres, we've got 200 or 100 ISOCs that could reach hundreds of thousands of non-Muslims every single month. We could easily reach the target audience in Britain. And so we need to use these institutions to outreach and educate them and give them our spin. If they're going to read the Express, they should be at the same time going to an open day or hearing something about the Muslims directly from the horse's mouth. We're not doing it because our leadership, as I said before. And the second thing we can do is to become politically conscious. Look, they would not say that about the Jewish community. Why? Because the Jewish community got involved in the political system and ensured there was a law that would lock him up if he said that about them. They would not say that about the black community, because when the blacks were oppressed in America and in Britain, they fought for their rights to become politically conscious and make that change, and now they are not allowed to be demonized. The sad fact is that we have not got the moral courage or the care for Islam, that we have not started that political fight. And until we stand up like men, we will never ever gain our freedom. We will always be trampled on, because we simply don't have what it takes, the sacrifice it takes to actually stand up and say, I'm going to fight for this, and this is what it means to be a Muslim. Instead, when we become a Muslim, all we want to do is debate with each other about which sect you are, or how high your trousers is, or are you allowed to wear a certain item of clothing or not.
Now, Al-Ghuraba Mosque is in the headlines, not only because it was attacked, but it took some action. It stood up and campaigned against, I think it went a march along the high street, and those Al-Muhajirun individuals who had a stall in Luton, it confronted them. They clearly were there. It seems as though you allude to the fact that you think that they're infiltrated. They clearly, everything they do seems to be geared towards making the conditions for Muslims in this country far worse. Do you think that and there's no doubt also that it did achieve quite a lot of positive coverage and reaching out to the wider community as well. Do you think that was a good move?
Absolutely. Look, it did generate some positive coverage, but there's two things. One, it's too little, too late. What were they doing for the last 10 years where the hate was festering in Luton? Why weren't they doing these outreach programs to ensure that this never happened, that they never got firebombed? Why did it take them to burn their mosque down? Believe me, if it was a Muslim house that got burned down, and believe me, a lot of Muslims have been attacked in Luton due to anti-Muslim prejudice, they didn't do a thing. When it's their palace or the thing that they run, then all of a sudden they're active. Okay, good that they got active. But is it just this? Are they going to go back to sleep after this? And another point to argue is, if they really want to counter extremism, is it a publicity stunt where they kind of kick the local nuts out of the mosque? Or should they have been far more active and say, if they're really sincere, they will be holding lessons in their mosque right now to teach every single Muslim how to become politically conscious?
Okay, well, Asghar, we can put those questions directly to the chairman of Masjid Al-Ghuraba. He's, I believe Brother Abdul Qadir is on the line now. Assalamu alaikum. Hello. Walaikum salam. And thank you very much for joining us. Of course, the Masjid Al-Ghuraba was firebombed several weeks ago. Can you just give us an update on that? Have the police made any progress in the investigation?
Unfortunately, there's been no progress, and we don't expect any progress, to be quite frank. But we just have to deal with our situation as we know best, according to Quran, the Sunnah, the way of the Salaf Salih. However, I do have a couple of comments I wish to make, building upon what your previous speaker has said. He mentioned in his speech that where were we before this firebomb? Just in case he's not done his homework, I'll let him know. For the last 18 years, we've been refuting extremism, and every refutation that we've done is appropriate to the harm that's come from these muhajirun and the likes of them. In the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've been working in schools, colleges, universities, doing talks up and down Luton. We've had dawah tables out there. We've compiled a number of different literatures. So I think he needs to do his homework before he can make bold statements like, all of a sudden they become active when, where were they beforehand?
Okay.
That's the first thing. Can I just carry on, please? The second point I want to make here is that he said that to distance ourselves from these extremists is a childish thing. He also mentioned that, we fall into the play of the government as well. I just want to make one thing clear, that from our deen al-Islam, if the brother is learned, I hope inshallah he will make some effort to learn that the very first sect to deviate from al-Islam was the Khawarij. And you all know this, and this was in the time of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And the Khawarij, when they deviated, the Prophet ﷺ, he foretold that they were going to come. Even in his time when he was alive, he said, Dhul Khuwaysira, who was a Jew, he was not a Muslim, he was a hypocrite Jew who infiltrated Islam, and from his offspring came the Khawarij. So therefore, the Ali and his companions still fought the Khawarij even then. They still fought them, and I'm not saying to fight Muhajirin, of course not. I'm not condoning any violence, but I'm just saying that that's to what degree they went. Yeah. So for us to not refute these people and not distance ourselves from them, it would be in contradiction to Islam, because Ali distanced himself from the Khawarij, and so did the companions. There's a lot more things I could say, to be honest.
Okay.
Just one, but I think then 2 things will be sufficient.
Abdul Qadir, one question. Just recently we've had, of course, the European elections, where the BNP made a breakthrough, unfortunately, in the northwest and in the Yorkshire region. And our guest in the studio, Asghar, has been a very prime advocate of mosques becoming centers of political education, to encourage young Muslims to get involved in the political process, hold MPs to account, hold councillors to account, etc. Can you just give us an example of, before your mosque was firebombed, of some of the activities that Masjid Al-Ghuraba used to do in terms of political outreach and holding MPs and others to account, please?
Your voice was very tinny and very hard to understand what you said. So can you just please... Do
you want me to?
Yeah, go on, Abdul Qadir. I'm sorry, it's probably my microphone, Abdul Qadir.
I think in a nutshell, I was asking what has Al-Ghuraba Mosque done before it was firebombed to increase political awareness and political outreach in the light of the recent elections, which elected 2 BNP MEPs.
Masjid Al-Ghuraba are not into political activism. We don't see this as a way forward to revive the state of Muslims in this country. You only have to look around the world what happened in Algeria with the GI and the FIS party. You only have to look what's happening in Pakistan and around the world to see that going into politics is not the way forward. The way forward is giving da'wah ila Allah, calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the book and the sunnah, and the way of the Salaf al-Salih, and with good preaching and with knowledge. When you do this, then you will find that the people, when they accept this da'wah, they accept this religion, they themselves want to implement the Sharia, want to implement Islam in themselves, in their own lives, in their home, in their communities. And slowly, as Islam grows, the people will want Islam. So much that then, if it's going to be through a political means or a different means, the people themselves will want Islam, and Sharia will be the uppermost. Whether they want to call this democracy, whether they want to call it, da'wah ila Allah, whatever they call it. But this is the only way Islam will come in this country. It will not come from, shedding blood and killing. It will not come from political activism, because this joining political parties, we've had many political parties in the past, and they're not succeeding. They've not gone far at all. I believe that the gentleman's call to political activism is a waste of time. There's no benefit, and he should look into the history of the FIS party. The FIS party in Algeria had 98% of the votes. They were toppled by the army.
Okay, Brother Abdul Qadir, sorry, we're running out of time. We need to give some space to the other guests as well. Okay, Asghar, Abdul Qadir says politics is a waste of time. Joining political parties is a waste of time. How would you respond?
If he thinks it's a waste of time, maybe he should, do some reading. I'm obviously a very intelligent guy. Saying, look into APAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committees. Jews were hated far more than Muslims were. Over the last 100 years in this country, in America and in Europe. And yet, due to their political activism, they've made a change. Black people were not even allowed to sit on the same in the same seats as a white person. And yet, due to their political activism, they have a black president in America. And it's this type of thinking that is holding the Muslims back. Young people have to listen to men like that, who use lots of Islamic words, so it sounds very Islamic, and start to say, well, do nothing. And what he's basically saying is, just keep talking. And if you talk, somehow they'll listen. And even and fine, but if that was so true, why is his mosque firebombed right now? And why are the police doing nothing about it? And why is there no law to ensure that that the press don't demonize the Muslims? That is the reason why his mosque was firebombed. So he's addressed none of those things because he doesn't think practically. All he's done is he studied from the guy who came from a foreign country and thinks that's the answer, because he hasn't applied what he's learnt in Britain today. What's more important, however, is the crime of the matter is that you can say that we went out and we had a stall in the town centre. That's not intelligent outreach. You can reach 10 people like that, or 100. Why have we not had massive open days? Why haven't you not done, massive DVDs in every house, thousands of leaflets, knocking on every single house, inviting them into the mosque?
Asghar, okay. If I can just put a question to you, Abdul Qadir. Recently, all of us as Muslims feel very deeply for injustice that is happening, and we want to try and correct it. Earlier this year, we saw the very savage bombing in Gaza by the Israelis, and we saw how our own government was openly condemning the Palestinian Hamas movement, and yet it refused to condemn the Israelis in anything like similar language. It referred to Hamas as terrorists, and yet would not refer to the savage Israeli bombardment of Gaza as being terrorists. Now, many Muslim groups believe that they should be lobbying the government and putting pressure on the government to mend its ways. How would you respond? What would you be your own and your mosque's method for challenging our government's behaviour in that regard?
First and foremost, let's make it explicitly clear that obviously we do not support Zionism, nor do we support any of the government terror acts in Afghanistan, Iraq, or wherever else they've been doing, bringing harm upon the Muslims. We are vanguards of Islam and Muslims just as much as most Muslims are. We have to work within our ability to prevent this government from doing to prevent this government from transgressing and carrying out terrorist acts.
How can you do that, Abdul Qadir, if you believe that engaging in politics is wrong?
I'll tell you why. Because you have to always weigh up the harms and the benefits, and you have to be objective. You have to use history as a guide to look to see if your efforts are going to bring the fruits or not, and then walk that particular way. Now, when we look in our recent history, we find that every political activist group has never achieved its goals. and it will not achieve its goals. Because why? It's away from the methodology of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is Islam channel we're speaking on. We're speaking about Islam. So let's look at what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam done and implement that. That's where our salvation is. The Prophet, Imam Malik, he said that verily the latter part of the generation will not be fixed except by what the first generation was fixed by. Allah said in the Quran, he said, وعد الله الذين آمنوا منكم وعملوا الصالحات أن يستخلفنكم في الأرض كما استخلف الذين من قبلهم إلى آخر الآية, which said that Allah has promised those from amongst you who believe and do righteous deeds that He will establish them in this earth, just as He established those before Him.
Okay, Sir Abdul we're in the final minute of the program. Thank you very much. Okay, Asghar, we'll let you respond to that. I mean, Abdul Qadir is saying, well, the Quran tells us that, you know, we follow the straight path and it'll be made easy for us.
And that's the problem. When he says Islam, he means pacified Islam, an Islam that does nothing in the face of butchery of our ummah. And when we talk about Islam, we mean active Islam, an Islam that says that you must involve yourselves in the world that you're in to stop the evil that occurs against the Muslims in this world today.
And so your overall response to Abdul Qadir and the kind of mentality it represents?
And I say, to be honest, more mosques are going to get firebombed in this country because mosques around the country are teaching exactly what this mosque is teaching, which is do nothing, we can't make a difference, and using big words like go back to Islam, which really, when you mean what exactly are you saying here, simply means sit down and do nothing and talk amongst your friends. We have to force these mosques to get active. We have to become a politically conscious community. We are not asking for a Sharia state in Britain, but we can stop our foreign policy killing our brothers abroad. And that is something within our power. And if we don't take it, we are not being good Muslims.
Okay, well, the viewers have heard both sides. We heard the position of Abdul Qadir from Masjid al-Ghuraba, which was regrettably firebombed, and we hope the police do make progress in catching the perpetrators there. And also Asghar Bukhari, a long-standing Muslim activist from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Would love to know your thoughts. But thank you very much for joining us today on the Politics and Media Show. From me, Inat Banglawala, and Abdurrahman.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. See you all next week, inshallah.